Welcome to the Supercharge Your Sales Velocity podcast, the show where I help you drive more opportunities, bigger deals, and faster wins. I'm your host, Fergal, and in today's episode, I'm delighted to talk to a sales consultant, coach, author, and speaker. She was brought up in Kansas, where she grew up in what she calls a sales family. Her mother and father were in the real estate business, where earnings came from commissions, and her brother was a very successful account executive for over 24 years. Now, during the last 20 plus years, she's worked with small and medium sized businesses, helping them expand their teams whilst growing their revenue. She's been running her own sales consultancy business for the last 8 years, and taking someone else's vision and bringing it to life is her passion. To say that sales is in her DNA, in her blood, is an understatement. Kristie K. Jones, you are very welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so excited. I understand that I'm guest number one. So
You
forever, I
are.
will be guest number one.
Forever, you will always be guest number one on this show. So, in the intro, I talked briefly about your upbringing in Kansas, starting off in the sales family. I'd love to get some insights from you on how that impacted your career, how you ended up essentially as the sales consultant you are today based on that upbringing.
Yeah, I think when it was happening in the moment, didn't really understand the impact that it had. And if anything, it had had a negative, impact on me because I'd seen how hard it was for my parents. My mom is 100%, commission rep as a real estate agent, and my father is the owner broker of a real estate firm. And if anything, we owned the building that we worked out of. They had a fire one summer. We were out of town on vacation when it happened. My dad's secretary at the time embezzled from us. My dad had bypass surgery at 53 and quadruple bypass surgery. And so, if anything, I had really put into the universe that I would never, ever, ever own my own business. I thought it would. I thought it was bad for health. I thought it was bad for everything.
And yet
And
here you
so,
are. You do own your own business.
yeah, no. And the funniest thing is, yes. And then the joke is now on me. But I think I saw, everything was modeled for us, right? And for my brother and me, and I think that's something that not everybody grows up with, even that, right? The work ethic was modeled. I mean, I say real estate is one of the worst things you can get into, although very lucrative, can be very lucrative. But things are different now that you can do a lot of things virtually. But in general, people are going to want to see houses nights and weekends when they're not working, right? And so, my mom really wouldn't start her day until noon, but she also wouldn't maybe show back up until 9. And so, it was really, and this was in the 80s. And so, my dad became a primary caregiver. He was the one taking us to orthodontists and dentist appointments and softball practice and maybe, even parent teacher conferences. The work ethic was definitely modeled. There was no doubt, though, that it changed our life. And what was very obvious was that there's a lot of money to be made in sales, right? I mean, we went from, taking one vacation a summer in a, rundown cabin near a lake because we were lake people, to really nice cabins, maybe 2 times a year, bigger boats, nicer vacations, bigger houses. And my parents paid cash for college, right? So my brother and I were so lucky and fortunate based on, what you hear today, that we came out of college, both of us debt free. And so, that was no denying that there was a lot of money to be made in sales. More money actually as an individual contributor than a sales leader.
Yes,
Because
there is, isn't there? I've
yeah,
noticed that too.
yeah, and my brother and I often had this conversation because he took the individual contributor path. He followed my mother, and he just kept saying, like, "You're leaving money on the table being a leader." And I said, "I know, but this is what I love to do, right? Like, I get my joy out of seeing other people, be successful, get that big paycheck. I loved that."
And I was never jealous of the individual contributor any more than me,
No.
because I just thought that's the way it should be, because they're at the coalface, right? They're right at the front, and I'm somewhat at the back, trying to derive strategy and so on. So I think they deserve everything that they earn.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think, everybody's got sales is a very stressful sport, and I say a high rejection sport. But in general, I never no, I mean, I was happy for my brother when he, became a very successful, nice six-figure individual contributor, but he did a lot of things differently than I did. I mean, he stayed with the same company for 24 years. He stayed in the same city. He made a lot of different decisions than I did, and it paid off for him. But I think, looking back on it as I started to write the book and even years before that, it was so obvious the impact that growing up in not just a sales family, but with an individual contributor and a sales leader all at the kitchen table at the same time, talking shop every night.
It's funny, there's a lot of correlation between my own background and yours because my parents never had a regular job either, and they ran their own businesses and managed convenience stores, and I ended up working in those stores as a kid,
Mhm.
and so that was my first introduction to sales, I guess. But I, like you, I saw the hard work. And like
Mhm.
that, they worked every Saturday and Sunday. So, and
Oh
at one
yeah,
stage we had,
retail's the worst hours.
yeah. And it wasn't 9 to 5, it was 7 a.m. in the morning, and they would close at 10 p.m. in the evening. So,
Yeah.
many Saturday I spent on my own with my brothers and sisters. So yeah, so I kind of get it, but yet you did start your own business. So what what led you
I know.
there?
You're like, "What happened?" It was never it never was a conscious decision. I thought at some point maybe consulting would be something I would enjoy doing, but I lost my job at a company I really enjoyed working for, and they did a restructuring, and I lost my job as a result of that. And they gave me 3 months severance if I would stay on for 3 months during that transition period, and I agreed to do that. And then really I went out to find my next sales leadership role. And in doing that and networking with people that were in my circle, particularly here in St. Louis, a whole bunch of things started to happen that were unintended and not intentional. By I was not being proactive in that direction at all. But one of the things I truly believe is when the universe speaks, you should listen. And it was becoming very apparent that owning my own business might be the path that I should be going down. And really, it was just the different introductions that people were making to me were in the swim lane that I've been living, which is early stage startups. And a lot of the founders were struggling to figure out sales processes, figure out who to hire, how to onboard them, how to comp them, what should their quota be.
All the usual, yeah, yeah.
Yep. And so a couple of the early connections that I made were with managing partners at the number one venture capital company here in Missouri. And so they started saying, can you meet with? And then it was very clear that these people needed help. And at some point, somebody asked me, one of the founders said, I can't do most anything that you told me needs to be done in order for this to work. Do you know someone who can help me? And I said, yes, I do. I can. And I was still in that
It's
3 month
me.
transition period. Yep, and that became client number 1, and then
Terrific.
a guy in my network that I hadn't spoken with in a few years, but it was a partner, a channel partner, reached out. His business was struggling. I met with him and told him what was going on with me, and he said, "Well, will you come in and run some seminars, some workshops?" And I said, "Yes." And then I was meeting with a husband and wife team, a privately owned SaaS company, as to be their VP of sales. And I thought to myself, you've only got 2 AEs and 1 SDR. Maybe I should be a fractional sales leader for you instead of a full-time sales leader for you. And so I approached them about that and they said, no, we really want a full-time sales leader. And I said, that's fine. Like, so we wished each other luck. And then a week later, the owner called and asked if I would meet with a consultant that they'd been working with. They hadn't disclosed that during the interview process, that they were actually working with a local consultant who turned out to be Mike Weinberg. And so Mike and I met for breakfast one morning and I told him like, hey, like I thought I was going down this path, but it now looks like I'm going down this path. And he was like, perfect. And he said, I think you should be their fractional sales leader. And I said, well, remember they said no. And he goes, don't worry, I'll take care of that. And a day later, the owner called and said, why don't you come back in and let's hammer out this situation. So before the 3 months was ever up at my W-2 job, I had 3 consulting clients.
What a great
I
start.
was trying to figure out what to call my business that I
Terrific
never
start.
intended to have.
And it's interesting how Mike was transformational in your career. And in
Yes.
some ways, I feel the same for myself because he's a mutual friend. And just before we started the recording, I talked about how I met Mike, and it was about 8 years ago now at this stage. Actually, very similar time,
Yeah,
perhaps,
yeah.
to
I
when
mean,
you
yes,
met
I
him.
met him in 2016.
Right,
That's how
there you
long I've
go.
had my business. So this is year 9 for me. So yep, we met him
Okay.
at the same
So
time.
very similar time. But
Yeah.
but meeting him for the training that he was giving my company at the time was transformational for me because it changed the way I approach sales. Because up to that point, I'd been in sales for probably 15 years, maybe at that stage. I'd never received any training, none whatsoever. And it's very common. And I've seen surveys and various things on LinkedIn that this is a very common thing. But meeting Mike was transformational because suddenly I had a framework to work with. And then I was able to apply that. So that was a terrific transformational moment for me as well. So you've been doing this for 8 years. The issues that you're trying to solve for clients, how have they evolved over that 8 years? Are they still exactly the same as they were 8 years ago? Or have they changed a bit?
They are very similar. Like the core problems are still the core problems, right? Anemic pipelines, not enough accountability, no accountability culture, trying to figure out how to quotas and compensation. And the piece that I think you and I would agree on, because we come from the school of Mike Weinberg, is like coaching is just not happening. And so what I've really seen happen as automation has become more in the forefront, AI, data, the science of sales has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger as a percent to total, but the art of sales has then gotten smaller and smaller and smaller. And so not only I call myself a data chick, so I'm not anti-data. Don't send me the anti-data, email. I'm not. But it doesn't matter if you understand the sales math, which I think is very important. If you don't know how to run a discovery call, handle an objection, negotiate a close to a deal, multi-thread and bring others into the organization, into the discussion. If you don't have the soft sales skills, as I call them, the art of sales, then it doesn't matter. The data doesn't matter because you can't pivot, you can't adjust, you can't change how you're doing something. You should be making a change because your close rate is low, your average sale is low, whatever the levers are, but you don't know how to change
No. And I suppose that a fool with a tool is still a fool,
that.
right? So the
I
tools are
like
not
that.
the
That
answer.
could be a Christieism, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll get to some Christianisms in a minute. So listen, we're in January. Sales kickoff season is upon us. Give me your thoughts on the year ahead versus the last couple of years in terms of sellers and sales leaders, and maybe your niche, which is SaaS companies, I believe. What do you see different now in 25?
Here in the US, for the US based listeners, we have a new administration coming in, and that administration has some very big initiatives that could impact the economy and businesses. And so, no matter whether you voted or you didn't vote, whether you liked the guy who's going to be in office or you don't like the guy, you got to put that aside and you got to figure out how their initiatives are going to impact your business. Because a lot of these initiatives are going to have wide ranging consequences, some good, some bad. So I think first and foremost, I always say like, you always got to have a plan B. And as an organization, so strategically as the organization, but as the individual contributor as well, right? I spend a lot of time lurking on Reddit. And it was shocking when I got on, and I got on a few months ago, because what you're seeing and hearing on LinkedIn, because it's not anonymous, is very different than what you're seeing
Very
and hearing
toned
on
down,
Reddit.
very, very straight. Yes, I can imagine.
Yeah, people are worried, people are stressed out, people are like, I don't even know that it's worth the money that I'm earning. Like, I'm earning big money, but I'm not sure the stress and the problems and the people and the leadership and the whatever is worth it.
So you're going to Reddit to bypass, if you like, the LinkedIn safe worlds of LinkedIn and see what the real world is saying on Reddit.
Yeah, I mean, there again, now you can say that perhaps there are more disgruntled people who are, going onto Reddit to bitch anonymously that would never do so on LinkedIn. But I mean, there's, the percentage of people talking about having been laid off, looking for a new role, trying to figure out what that would be, not being paid commission on time. Like, there's all kinds of big problems going on out there. So if I take LinkedIn and put that to the side and think about what might happen in 2025, I mean, I think we're going to lose salespeople. And I think it's a combination of,
And lose them to where? Where are they going to go?
I think
Just
lose them
completely
to
different
more,
careers.
right. I mean, lose them to jobs that don't have a variable compensation plan, lose them to jobs where they can get an income that they know that every other week they're going to make X and they're not going to have to worry about whether or not they're going to be able to pay rent or whether they're going to be laid off. I mean, I'll call it a non-performance based job, so to speak, like where it's not where, sales is an objective sport. There's nowhere to hide, right? But there's places to hide in other types of roles. It's funny, I don't see a lot of people talk, I read a stat yesterday that more people started their own business last year than the last 20 years. Just in general, like gig economy, just dropped out of working for the man. And so I also wonder if some of those people will do something like that they have a passion project that they think they may be able to make some money off of. But I think, as the Gen Zers, they're just 3 or 4 years out of college. They're now starting to get to a place where they're, looking at quality of life. And at some point, my hope is in the next few years after this, after 2025, that those Gen Zers are going to be in leadership positions and they will understand, like, I think they've had bad management, right? As we mentioned, like, there's no coaching, there's no training. So I always say, like, the sales leader wears 5 hats: leader, manager, mentor, coach, and trainer. And, Mike talks about the bullpen, right? Like the loss of the bullpen is causing people to not get the training that they need, not even on the job training, right? We're not even giving them on the job training anymore because they're not listening to the person in the cubicle next to them, right? And try and like leaning over the cubicle afterwards, are like, so what happened? Like, I only heard your side of it. What was going on? Or high five over the cubicle. And I think that, as much as the kids coming, the Gen Z and the millennials don't want to be in the office, in certain professions, and I think ours is one of them, I think that's going to be critical. So as this back to work initiative seems to be starting across the country, and it's starting with the big Fortune 500 companies, but my son he's a Gen Zer. He's 25. He works for Wells Fargo Advisors here in St. Louis. He's in a hybrid role, and he goes into the office 5 days a week. He hates being at home. He went through college. He was a pandemic college kid, and so he likes being around people. He wants to be in the office, and I think it's made him. And he's been promoted. He's been there 2 years now, and I think it's made him a much better employee. I think his learning curve is higher. And when new employees start, they pair him with him. They set them right next to him. So I think if people were open, I think I'd like to see more hybrid work. I have a client up in Buffalo right now that's hybrid. And even though I'm virtual, I'm doing fractional sales leadership, I have all of my team in the bullpen together,
Do
right?
you?
Sitting
Okay.
right next to each other.
Right. And I think that's interesting because there is definitely a trend towards back to office. And as you
Yep.
said, like Amazon and Dell and JP Morgan, they're all
Google
doing
and
it.
yep. All the finance
And
people. Yep.
and yet I think there's a whole cohort of small businesses which probably don't want to do it because they don't have offices.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. The majority
Right.
of my clients do not have offices.
So they're probably never going to go that route. So
Mhm.
there's this interesting dichotomy where we have a lot of larger companies who are pushing it and the smaller companies are not. And I suppose people will figure out which side they want to be on.
But there's things you can do though, right? Like even though the majority of my clients don't have an office, this is a true statement, and my Buffalo client is a complete anomaly, right? It just so happens that there's a tax incentive that their employees get. They don't pay state tax if they come to the office 3 days a week. And so it was easy to hire. It's easier to hire people when your state offers that for this special program that they qualified for. But it doesn't still mean, like, I'm still seeing people onboard employees remotely, but I'm like, why don't we fly them to the city for 2 weeks? Or even a week, and go get a co-working space and sit them next to a senior seller. You still with the onboarding plan and whatever, but I just think there are things that we could be doing, that we should be doing, that we're not doing, that's going to make it that much easier. I mean, like I can call monitor. We've got HubSpot. Most of my clients have HubSpot. I can go in and listen to calls anytime I want. And again, I coach at least 2 calls a week from each rep. I think that's really important. That's how I learn where their skill set's at. But I think a lot of people aren't doing that. I think a lot of people are using things like Gong and thinking that the Gong will give the individual contributor the data that they need, that their talk time was too much or whatever. But that's not like, I do this, I call it the start and stop game, which the rep hates and I love. I'll be listening to a call and I'll just stop it. And I'm like, what's the next question? Right? And they're like, huh? And I'm like, there's an obvious next question, right? I teach this technique called question on a question. You start with like, big, big, big question. Like, tell me about the current situation. What's the current situation there? Right. And then they start to tell you. And then you have to ask a question based on the answer, and a question based on the answer, and a question based on the answer until you get narrowed down. And the only way to teach them how to do that is things like that.
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't think
I,
people are doing that.
I want to delve into discovery a little later on because it's one of your Christiisms, right? About it's not an event, right? It's a process.
That's right.
But before we get there, let's talk about your book, okay? So the title of the book, "Selling Your Way In," terrific title.
Thank you.
What does it mean, selling your way in?
Yeah. I mean, sales is one of the very few professions that allows you to own your own income and be able to build the life that you want. And so, you know, I initially had titled it "Selling Your Way Out," selling your way out of the life
Which
you
people are
didn't.
probably more familiar with that
Right, yeah.
phrase,
I
right?
was like selling your way out, like selling your way out of the life you have today that you don't like, but I was like, "Nah, that's negative. Let's do positive." And so I really it's not a how-to book. I was very conscious there's plenty of people out there, Mike included, that are writing, Jeb Blunt, there's Anthony and Arundel, there's great Mark Hunter, there's great books out there about the how-to piece. But I wanted to write something that was I think so many sales professionals are struggling, fear-based, and failing because they picked the wrong sales role. And I think what happens is you get out of college and you get, this frustrates me about the world that we live in. The starter job, SDR. But that's a hunter job. Where's the starter farmer job?
I've never seen it. And
There
and
isn't
and
one.
I was going
Right.
to ask you, do you think that's deterring people from getting
Yes.
into sales? Because
Yes.
it's, anytime I talk to people about sales, they almost always mention the words cold calling. And I'm saying that's a relatively small part of sales.
Yep.
Yes, it is part, and it's the entry level that you just talked about. It's a big part of that. But I
Yep.
definitely think it turns people off, right?
It does. And so, I wanted people to know that, again, like I grew up in a 100% commission family, right? Where, my dad took a salary sometimes, but if my mom, if the real estate market was bad, he didn't because he had to make payroll for his employees. And so there's so many sales roles out there from 100% commission to 100% base salary and everything in between, retail sales, hospitality sales, software sales, manufacturing. There's so many different sales roles. And I think what happens is you get your first job out of college and then you put the blinders on. You're like, okay, like I'm in, SaaS is my thing, or, insurance is my thing, and I'm going to stay in this thing. And then all of a sudden it gets harder and harder and you're struggling, but you're maybe not playing to your sales superpowers or your strengths. You may be in a bad industry. Like, again, I mentioned the administration's changing. There are going to be better industries than others in the next 4 years to be selling into.
I think playing to your strengths is really interesting. Just a quick story, because last year I dropped out of my corporate job, decided to start up my own business. I was doing that. I was creating the website, getting the offers all lined up, prioritizing what I wanted to do. And I had targeted fractional CRO, CSO as the primary offer. That's what I was going to do, because I'd held those roles for a number of years. But then I read your book. And then you led me down the path of thinking, hang on a second, you got to play to your strengths, but also what do you want to be known for? What are you known for? What do people know you for? And I look back over the last 8 or 9 years and I realized that one of my strengths was helping existing clients to deliver value. And in return, I would get more opportunities and bigger deals and faster wins for my own organization. And I would do that through key account planning. And I developed my own framework. And I said, hang on a second, this is actually your superpower, not the fractional zero. Yes, I can do fractional zero. I know I can
Sure.
do it.
Yeah, and I could do sales training at Fortune
Yeah,
500 companies too, but that's not my superpower.
exactly. So thank you for that, because so I
Oh, you're
immediately
welcome.
changed tack. I changed the website completely. I dropped fractional completely. That's not what I'm going
Nice.
to do at all. I'm curious, have other people had a similar reaction to what I've just said? To your book? Have they also taken something like that and gone a different path?
Yeah, it's been really rewarding. I get a lot of messages on LinkedIn of people who reach out and said, "Oh my gosh, like I didn't, one of my Christiisms is I've got 30 minutes for everyone." I've been spending a lot of time in the last few months coaching people that literally just reached out to me on LinkedIn and said, "I think I'm in the wrong sales role, but I don't know what to do. Can you give me some time?" And so I've talked to a number of people who, I've been regularly talking with a guy who wants to get out of roofing sales. You know, he's like, "I don't want to do this anymore." And I'm like, "I got it, buddy." And so, I think, yes, it has a lot of people have reached out and said, and again, there's a workbook that goes along with the book. So I'm encouraging people to download the workbook and work through it. But they're getting as far as I'm in the wrong sales role, but they're struggling a little bit with what should that next role be. And again, from your perspective, I'm so glad that you made that pivot because there's not a lot of consultants doing what you're doing, right? And so how do you differentiate yourself from other, fractional? Again, the fractional thing blew up, right? A few years ago. I started out my first 18 months, that's all I did was fractional from 2016 to halfway through 2017. I still do it, but it's about 10 to 15% of my business
Oh,
now.
right. It's only a small
That's just
part
a
of what you
very
do now.
small
Hmm.
percentage of my business currently. But yeah, there's been a lot of people who reached out and said, like, no one's ever said this to me the way you've said this to me. And I've never really thought about, I say, like, are you, it's not just the right sales role. Like, are you selling the right thing into the right industry, you know, SMB market, mid market, enterprise market? Are you working for the right type of company with the right, type of tech or product and service? What
Yeah,
about the
there's
sales
there's
leader?
so many variables in there, isn't there? It's not
So
just
many,
all
yeah.
about the individual.
Well, it's not, I usually say, like, there's 70 plus sales jobs out there, but when you start to figure out there's 70 plus types of roles, but if you factor in industry and then you factor in product or service and then you factor in the company and then you factor in the leadership, there's thousands of options out there. And how do you figure out which ones and again, some of it is trial and error. Like I say to people like, hey, you may just need to spend 5 years, in a sales situation. My brother would tell you that he would never have been the successful seller he was if he had left he was in staffing and there for 23 years. I do believe that once you've figured out your swim lane, staying for 3+ years is going to be to your advantage. But coming out of college, maybe you've had a retail sales job, maybe you've had a hospitality sales job, but the real world sales job may be very different than that. And so I do encourage people to take 2 or 3 jobs in 5 years and see see like, what do we like about this one? What don't we like about this one? And then it wasn't until I was in my 30s that I'd been in retail sales till I was 30 as a buyer for a major department store. And then I got into SaaS. But then after that job, and spent 10 years at that job, then I was like, I really like this small, mid-sized company. But then I got into a VC-backed company. And I say I got the VC-backed bug. And now I'm in my 40s. Right. So it took me to get my 30s.
It's not like you're in your 20s and you've suddenly decided I'm going for these
No.
VC-backed companies,
Oh, no,
right?
no,
It's
no.
taken 15 years odd to get there.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, I spent 8 years in an industry that I would never touch again. And then I spent 10 years in a privately owned SaaS B2B company, fewer than 50 employees. And then my next job was VC backed. And then I never looked back. I was like, okay, now it's all coming together. Privately owned, B2B, SaaS, VC backed, smaller company, fast growing, smart leadership. Then it sort of just all came together. I was in my 40s.
So the puzzle started to come together much later in your career.
I was not an early adopter to that.
And I think the book is really interesting because it has multiple audiences, I feel. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think it's aimed at those people who are thinking of a career in sales, or maybe they're on the periphery of sales and looking to get in, or they're in sales already and they're looking to up their game. They want to get to that 10% or top 10%. Or maybe they're trying to get out of the corporate world, perhaps, or whatever job they're in, and do something on their own. So there's almost 3 different
I think I wrote it for 3. That's exactly the 3 audiences.
Is that right?
Yeah. And I think, there's the newbie, there's the struggler, I'm struggling here. And then there's the is there another world out there that I've missed that maybe I can take, my game to the next level? Like I'm doing okay, but maybe there's another level that I haven't touched yet.
And for those who are in sales and perhaps not quite getting what they wanted out of it, but they do enjoy sales, what's your advice to them? How could they do a reset here?
First off, I'm always surprised when I work with some sellers that they don't have a circle of sellers in their world. They don't have other friends that they get together with regularly that they talk shop with. And I think part of that is pandemic has caused some of that.
Yeah, because some people have been employed virtually. They've never even physically met their colleagues and over multiple jobs.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah, that's right. And so you need a circle. Like one of the Christiisms is your circle matters, right? And you need people who are doing sales, but not necessarily in the way that you're doing it. So this is not like you and your coworkers going out for a virtual beer at the end of the day. Like who in your circle, in your LinkedIn circle, did you go to school with that's in sales, that lives in your city that's in sales? I'm part of a few meetup groups in the tech space. And I'm always meeting different people and finding out about different companies and different jobs. So, I think you need a circle of sellers that are not doing what you're doing to figure out what else is out there. I also think you need a mentor, right? I think you need somebody who, again, not necessarily in your organization, a more senior seller who's been where you want to go. They have the second home. They're taking the nice vacations. Kids are going to private school, like whatever it is for you, or it could be that they don't have to, they can put their phone down on the weekends. Maybe that's what you strive for, right? That you're not attached to your smartphone nights and weekends. Whatever it is that makes the life that you want to have that you don't have today, what that looks like, find those people and ask them for time. We should be, those of us who've gotten where we're at should be on the give back program because somebody stepped into our life, or in my case, a few people stepped into my life at the right time and made an impact on me. And I would not be I'm very clear in the book, I would not be where I am today if there weren't for a few people and I call them out, I name them. Sometimes that was a formal mentor relationship. And in other cases, it was an informal relationship, right? It was just somebody that I felt like I could pick up the phone and call and be like, I'm stuck. Like I got this problem and I don't know how to solve it. And I just need to talk through it with you.
Because I've put a few posts on LinkedIn exactly on that. So I want to give back. I'm in this game 30 plus years. And I've got virtual strangers just coming at me, and it's interesting. And I learn a bit from it, obviously. So I'm just listening to a new industry, something I don't know nothing about, and then just sharing what's, I suppose, almost natural or normal for me, but it isn't for them. And I think mentorship is so important. Just talk to me a bit about getting into that top 10%, because there's certain habits, aren't there, that
Yes.
the top 10 percenters all
Yep.
share.
Yeah. Discipline's at the top of that list for me, right? The people who get to the top are disciplined, and that's in their personal life and their professional life. So they understand that, sometimes you got to do things you don't want to do, which sometimes means getting to the gym at 5 o'clock in the morning. Sometimes it means picking up and doing some cold calling. Sometimes it means having hard conversations with either leadership or prospects. But the discipline around that, and again, discipline becomes habits. So, changing behavior requires the discipline. But once the behavior is changed, then it's a habit. It becomes consistent, and then you can go off and find the next thing that needs some discipline in your life. I also think like knowing when to leave your current job. Like I hate to be the girl who I hate to be the pink slip fairy, but I think people right now, so forget about the people who are being laid off, because that's not something they can control. But I'm still seeing in the world I live in the shiny object syndrome, as I call it, where like the new, AI is the new whatever. So, before it was like everybody wants to get into SaaS, and now everybody wants to get into AI. And I'm like, but is that really the right thing for you to sell? Do you even like it? Do you understand it? Are you using ChatGPT every day to run your own little business? And so, I'm seeing a lot of that flailing, but top 10 percenters are very strategic about what I call their step changes, right? They're not leaving this job to take another job unless it's a means to the end, right? It's a harder job. It's a better pay structure. It's a better industry than they're currently in. It's a higher average sale. It's closer to enterprise than mid market. Although, by the way, I don't think everybody's cut out for enterprise, right? If you were a mid market specialist and you were making, $4,000 a year, you never have to do enterprise.
And sometimes enterprise is seen as almost like a promotion, that you should be on a path going from SMB into enterprise. I don't see it like that at all.
I don't
Almost
either.
the
And I
opposite.
think
Yeah.
it's for a very small percentage of people. I mean, 12 to
Mm.
18 month sales cycles, figuring out how to keep the ball moving that whole time so the ball doesn't stop, trying to corral 8 to 10 different people all the time and keep them, engaged and in the loop. Like that's not for the faint of heart, and it's
You
not
need
for
to be
everyone. It's
super
not.
patient as well in that
Oh yeah,
regard.
it's not everyone's skill set. I mean, it's just not
Mm.
everyone's skill set. So, but the top 10 percenters, I say the work to get to the top happens outside of work, right? They're
That's one of your
lifelong learners.
criticisms, right?
That's
And
one
by
of
the
my
way, criticisms are these principles that you live by, right?
yes.
And work by. Yeah.
Yes. And they're lifelong learners. They're reading books, they're listening to podcasts, they're getting newsletters from, people who are putting out good content. That they're disciplined around sleep habits and eating habits and exercise habits. They're mentally, physically, and spiritually fit. They know that I can't be my best at work if I'm not my best as an individual, as a human. And so they care about the kind of things that some other people don't care about. Right. And so I always say, like, Susan's sitting next to Sally, we're, the QB next door. And she's like, I'm saying everything that Sally's saying, but Sally's making all this money and I'm struggling. But you've never asked Sally what the hell she does when she leaves at 6,
Yes.
right? You don't know that she's on her way to a mastermind group with 3 other sellers in the city. You don't know what she's doing to feed her mind and body.
Or she's not listening to music on her commute. She's listening to a
Yeah,
podcast on sales or whatever, something outside of
right.
work. And another criticism is around discovery. Discovery isn't an event; it's a process. I wholeheartedly agree with this. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah. I got tired of walking into, and so I did what you did. I created my own structure for sales stages. But I mean, I walk into companies over and over and over where discovery is a sales stage. And I was like, well, no, that's an activity that happens at that sales stage. But discovery is an activity that should happen at every sales stage. So you can't call all 5 sales stages discovery, right? So, I changed the names of the sales stages to better fit, and I made discovery an activity under sales stages, because I create for my clients a discovery called template. It's a one pager basically of all the most important information that's been gathered over the time of the sales cycle. And so, you can look at that piece of paper and see where things are blank. One of the things that is almost always blank early on and that sometimes never gets filled in is the business impact of the problem they have in dollars. Right. And so,
It's a tricky
people.
one to sometimes extract even from the client. Sometimes they're not even clear themselves, but it takes a number of iterations to get
That's right.
the answer, right?
Yeah, I mean, you've got to, maybe you're not talking to the right person. Maybe they've never thought about it. Maybe they've never put pen to paper, and I always say, like, grab your calculator, here we go. And so I think that you're always like, again, you have to build trust over time. So I can't ask you in call number one, the first 30-minute call I have with you, like, so tell me exactly how much money you're losing as a result of that problem. Like, that's never going to happen. That's why discovery has to be a process, because over time, as you build trust, they're more willing to share information that they wouldn't have been willing to share in the discovery call. If you're just having one 30-minute discovery call, you're leaving a lot of information on the table.
Mhm. I think that's really, really accurate because you're right. I often see sales stages including discovery, meaning that you do discovery once and then you move on to solutioning and proposals and so on.
Mhm.
And I can't tell you how many times I've seen people fail at that negotiation or closing stage when it's a discovery issue. Okay, I want to move on and talk about if they're not ready now, the NRNs. That's a great
Yep.
phrase that you have there. Tell us more about that.
Philosophically, I don't believe in no. I believe that most times when people hear a no, it's really an NRN and not right now, right?
Yeah.
For whatever reason, that is your job as the seller to uncover the reason based on asking good questions. But most people don't have a formal nurture strategy. So whether they say NRN during the prospecting call, they don't have any interest in sitting down and talking to you further. They, say, oh, we're happy with our current vendor. Well, that's an NRN. That's not a no, because they're
But a lot of
happy to.
sellers are treating it as a no, right? They kind of
Right.
they
Yeah.
they say okay, shut down and off they go.
Yeah. I mean, but that's an NRN because they're happy
Yeah.
today at 10 a.m. when you called them. But 24 hours later, something could happen, right? The vendor has a data breach. The vendor ups their pricing. There's a multitude of things that would make you unhappy within a very short period of time. And so when you hear that either at the prospecting stage or you're, 3 stages into the sales cycle, when they chose another vendor or a competing project shows up or budget cut comes down the road and they have to tell you no, that's also an NRM because it's circumstantial. It's based on a circumstance that could change. And so then you have to have a formal nurture strategy, which most people don't. And if you have marketing, most people are like, oh, well, marketing will keep them warm while I go off, and call other people and go prospect other people. But again, you have to ask enough questions about why it's a not right now and what would have to change in order for it to be a better time.
I don't think you need marketing, do you? You don't really need marketing to have an NRN process, right? You can do it yourself as a salesperson.
Well, I'm saying I think a lot of people just defer to marketing and
Yeah.
they're like, oh, marketing sending them a newsletter every month and inviting them to webinars and whatever. And I'm like, but it's not marketing's job it's marketing's job to keep people warm, but it's your job to hit quota and sell. And so, I need to be asking questions like, oh, so you're happy with your current vendor? Great. How long have you been with them? Why did you purchase them? When does your contract come up for renewal? You know, what might make you change vendors or even give us a consideration to look at? I mean, that doesn't stop there. And so majority of people have CRM systems. Most people think that they're a punishment, but I think there should be on the benefits list under, health, dental, vision, 401k. Because like, how on earth would you remember all that? Right. And so what I say to people is like, you should be constantly putting things in your future funnel, meaning you should come in at the beginning of every month and go, oh my gosh, I have 27 follow-up calls from people I've talked to in the past that were NRNs. And so like now you have 27 warm things as opposed to all of the 2,700 cold things that you might be looking at every month. And so, yeah, I think it's just part of it's just mental, right? I truly can hardly think of a no other than we're going out of business. But those people have to go be employed somewhere else. So that company might be a no, but that person's probably a not right now.
There's no getting away from us. Okay.
And that's right. Like I can come up with a reason to reach out for almost anything.
Let's pivot a little bit because I want to talk about talent acquisition because I know it's one of the services that you offer in your
Yes.
consulting business, and I think talent acquisition is probably right up the very top of the tree in terms of what we should be doing as sales managers and sales leaders.
Yes.
So you do a lot of this. Just give us a bit of insight as to what you actually do in this space.
Yeah. Again, not a staffing company. We don't source. We don't
No.
charge a percentage of base salary. I literally call it project managing the hiring process from start to finish. So someone from my team, myself included, a lot of times, is involved in every step, including running interviews. Part of that is because of the world that I live in, that the majority of my clients are tech founders and, didn't grow up hiring or interviewing or managing sales or marketing leaders or customer success people. So we write the job description to the offer letter. We stick around for the first couple of weeks of onboarding to make sure you don't screw that up either. But in general, like there, really two reasons. I always thought when I knew that the service was necessary. It wasn't a service I started with. It came in about at the 3-year mark. But I was like, well, once they figure out my formula, because I could have a process for everything. So I have a hiring process that we follow, to the T, then they'll just do it themselves, right? I mean, I even give them the questions I'm going to ask. But what happened is that I get a lot of repeat business for two reasons. One, they still aren't sure about the question on a question, right? So my interview questions start with the big open-ended question, but they don't necessarily know what to ask once they get the answer. So they don't really know how to dig deep.
Which you can't really script, Kristie, right? You can't, you've got to have some intuition and be able to
Correct.
follow through on that, right?
Yep. So their lack of confidence around that. And then the other thing is like just administratively, one of the things I have is we review resumes within 24 hours of them hitting our doorstep. And then we make a move with the candidate as long as they're moving forward every 48 hours. That's very time consuming. And so with everybody being as busy as they are, we make them give us access to their calendar. Interviews just show up on their calendar. We send them the scorecards and the resumes and interview questions ahead of time, and they just have to show up. And my team and I are running those interviews. So in this day and age, there are so many people. Like I assume that every candidate I'm talking to is actively interviewing with at least 4 other companies. I mean, I asked the question to validate, but in general, like we have to move pretty quickly without missing any steps. That's why the 48-hour rule, because I want to get through 5 to 7 steps, but I want to do it in a fashion that doesn't, again, remember I'm lurking on Reddit. Big subreddits on how bad recruiting is out there and how people are ghosting.
What's your username on there? We need to know your username so we can spot.
I can't reveal my sources. I can't reveal my sources. But so I think in this day and age, so first off, now that I've written the book and I am now drinking my own Kool-Aid, I'm also making sure that the people I'm interviewing, like, I think this is a good idea for them, right? And sometimes I say to them, hey, I think you're really looking for a gatherer job. Like, you really want to keep what you catch kind of gig. And that's not this. You're going to hand your baby off to adoptive parents to raise, and you may or may not get pictures at Christmas and birthdays.
Yeah, so you're helping them out there.
Yeah, I think I want everybody to be successful. This isn't a zero-sum game, sales. Like, everyone can win. Like, everyone can make the money they want to make, have the lifestyle they want to have, sell the thing that they want to sell into the industry that they're passionate about. So yeah, and I think one of the things that I think a lot of companies miss, and again, as a lurker on Reddit, the interview process is not a two-way street. About halfway through, I flip the script, right? It's all about me. Initially, it is about me figuring out whether or not you are capable, like you have the skill set to do the job that we need you to do, that you could be successful here. But then I need to flip the script, because if you really do know yourself, which is what that first third of the book is about, like you've got to know yourself before you get to know the prospect. If you really do know yourself, I have to make you an educated consumer. I have to give you enough information as the candidate to decide. And I say to candidates all the time, you will know well before I will. You should, if you know yourself well enough, you should know before I do whether or not this is a good idea based on, all the information I'm giving you. But I have to give you information. I have to introduce you to other people. I have to tell you about the warts, right? I mean, I'm interviewing for a sales and marketing VP currently for a client, and which is one of the hardest roles to fill, by the way, because having been a sales leader and a marketing leader is very, like, most people at this stage of their career are taking one path or the other, and they're not a hybrid. So it's a very hard position to fill. But, I started getting some resumes from the recruiter, that they have an internal recruiter the company does. And they were people who had been selling products like batteries. And I was like, oh, no. We sell service. Like, we sell air. Like, it's not even software what they do. They're a consulting service. They're an engineering consulting service. We sell air. Selling air, very different than selling batteries. Right? So I got the recruiter on the phone, who normally does a lot of recruiting for the technical side, hires a lot of engineers, knows that world inside and out. So, hiring good salespeople is not something, in the last year, I've had several clients who had internal recruiting teams who still hired me to hire their sales professionals, because their internal recruiters have never been in sales or marketing, and they have, again, like, whatever the 80% that you hire of, they've nailed that. But it's really, I mean, it's a risk. It's a risk on both sides. It's very risky. It's much more risky in the world I live in because it's a startup. So a lot of times I'm hiring sales rep number one, which is the most risky thing on both sides.
And I think you're right. I think HR don't have a lot of experience of hiring salespeople, and they tend to have a certain set of questions which really don't apply to sales at all. I'm conscious that we've been talking for a little while. I could talk for hours, right?
I know.
But I just want to finish maybe on one question here around, you talked about people getting interviews, but I'm talking to people who are not even getting interviews.
Hmm.
These are well qualified people, and it's more than one person. Quite a few people have been hitting me up about this. My approach to this is full on personalization. You've got to stand out from the crowd. You've got to be different. Maybe share a few thoughts. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I've had a lot of those calls recently too. First and foremost, I've seen a lot of bad resumes recently, right? I
Right.
mean, one of the candidates that I interviewed for the sales and marketing position, it was 5 pages. And I'm like,
Wow.
what? Like,
It's never
I
going to
mean,
get
and
read.
again, yep, you've done that much work in that many companies. But, I remember when I got laid off, this was like years and years ago. I got laid off. I was employee number one let go when we got acquired. It was my very first VC backed company, and they got acquired, and they gave me outsourcing help. And that person, and I've lived with this forever, so they're like, no one cares past 5 or 6 years. No one cares. It just doesn't matter. And so, first and foremost, you've got it. Now, I have humans, but a lot of people don't anymore. My company does not use an applicant tracking system for my clients. If my client has one, we'll use that. But I have a human. I have a human on my team that looks at every resume, puts them in a yes, no, maybe pile, right? And so, what did I teach them to look for? Advancement. So that step change. So go back 3 jobs. Is every job better than the last one? Are they trying to better themselves and get up the ladder? I'm looking for numbers. We all know that the majority of sellers, especially in the SaaS space, are only getting to about 60 to 65% of quota. But the majority of resumes say differently, right? And so we got to flag that. I still need to interview them because, if they were still the number two person at the company, but they only got to 68% of quota, well, that's a quota problem, not necessarily a seller problem, but I'm looking for numbers, and I'm with you. I say to people, like, you need to figure out, I was watching the Notre Dame game, football, at a friend's house last Monday, and her nephew is in law school, and he came in, he's staying with them while he's in law school here in St. Louis. And my friend was asking him, if he was, he was interviewing for a job, an internship for the summer. She was asking him about it. He goes, the recruiter's on vacation for the next week, so everything's at a standstill. And I didn't even turn around. He was sitting behind me at the kitchen table, and I go, well, I hate to beg to differ or be that girl, but you're wrong. And I had his attention, and then I turned around and I said, who's the hiring manager? He's like, I don't know. And I said, well, that's the problem. I said, well, the recruiter's off on vacation. You should be reaching out to the hiring manager and telling them all of the reasons why, when the recruiter gets back, she should interview you, or he should
Yeah.
interview you.
It's almost treating it like you treat a prospect, isn't it?
Well, and that's what's
It's
so funny. This is what's so funny. And I say this over and over and over again. We treat our careers in a completely different strategy and process than we treat our prospecting. We're not doing enough research. We're not multi-threading. We're not figuring out who the influencers and decision makers are. We're not customizing our outreach. We have all of these skills, and then we are reactive about our own career. We're very proactive in prospecting, in trying to get new clients. We are reactive on our career. We just, like, all of a sudden the phone rings and the recruiter's on the other end, and they're like, boy, do I have a job for you. And the next thing you know, you're 2 interviews in.
the CV's gone. You've interviewed twice, yeah, and you haven't even given it a second thought.
You need to treat your career the same way you treat your prospecting. You have an ideal customer profile. You should have an ideal company profile, right? You have personas. You should know who the ideal company profile personas are. You should know the problems that you could solve for them. You should be writing emails just like you're writing prospecting emails. Like, we have all of the skills. If you've been properly trained, right? You know how to do this. And yet you don't do anything until the phone rings. And what makes you think that that recruiter knows anything about you? They've looked at your LinkedIn profile for about 2 minutes.
Kristie, thanks so much. This has been really insightful. Can you just
So
finish off and
fun.
tell us how can people get hold of your book? How can they get hold of you? How can
Mhm.
they contact you if they need to talk to you more?
Sure. You can buy the book almost anywhere that you like to buy your books, but you can go to sellingyourwayin.com and it'll give you some links into some vendors that are selling the book.
Thank
And
you.
then my ask is always this: please connect with me on LinkedIn, send me a note and tell me what your one takeaway from my conversation today was and what you're going to institute.
Terrific. That's a great way to finish up. Kristie, thank you once again. Really appreciate you joining the show. Thank you.
Thank you.